In December of 1933, the United States government repealed Prohibition. The newspapers called it freedom. In Harlem, it quietly took away one of the few things that had been keeping thousands of families in their homes. Because the thing it took away was not a speakeasy. It was a party, or rather, something that wore the word party like a disguise. Social whist party. That was the line printed across the top of a little card, no bigger than the ones a salesman would hand you, slipped to a stranger on a Harlem stoop on a Saturday afternoon. It promised whist, a genteel parlor game played with cards. It promised a social evening. It promised nothing that would make a passing policeman slow his step. And it was a lie. A careful, necessary, gentle lie, because there was no whist. And the gathering it advertised had exactly one purpose, which was to keep the host from being put out on the sidewalk by Monday morning. Somebody's grandmother threw one of these. In a railroad flat with the rent past due, she printed a card, fried the chicken, and charged $0.25 at the door, and she did it without asking anyone's permission. Here is what most people get backwards. We were taught to see the Harlem of these years as either glamour or ruin, the Renaissance or the slum. The truth is that beneath both of those stories ran an economy these families built with their own hands, at a time when nearly every ordinary door was closed to them. What you are about to hear is not folklore. It is American history. And some of it could have landed the host in a jail cell. Number 15 was liquor brewed in a bathtub that brought the police wagon to the door. Number 2 was women defending their homes from their own windows. And number 1 is how this whole quiet, improvised economy, so much of it lived in the gray space just outside the law, ended up helping to change the law itself. Now let us count down 20 ways Black Harlem turned a house party into a shield against eviction. We start at 20. Number 20, the quarter at the door. It started with a single coin. A guest climbed the stairs, stepped past the coats piled on the bed, and dropped a quarter into a jar by the door. And just like that, somebody's grandmother had turned the most private thing she owned, her own home, into a business for one night. 25 cents a head, about $5 in today's money, and 160 heads through the door cleared a $40 rent. And she needed every head because everything was stacked against her. A black family in Harlem in those years was likely earning around $1,300 a year, while a white family earned closer to $1,600 a year and still paying $20 to $30 a month more in rent for smaller, more crowded rooms. The records are plain about it, so she set a price of her own, and she collected it at her own front door. If this is the kind of memory you would like to see kept alive, I hope you will subscribe and stay with us. Number 19, the social whist party card. The card itself was a small masterpiece of disguise. Nearly everyone opened with a rhyming couplet, a scrap of homespun poetry, and then the gentle untruth. Social whist party, a midsummer frolic, a chitterling strut, anything but the plain fact of it. One card that survives reads, "You don't get nothing for being an angel child, so you might as well get real busy and real wild." It was an invitation and a hiding place in the same breath because the wrong reader, the marshal, the beat cop, the landlord's agent, could shut the whole night down. The card gave them nothing to use. It is the same quiet instinct as a word passed only to people you trust, an event you would not put up on a public notice. The same instinct, only here the stakes were a family's home. Number 18, the wayside printer. You did not own a printing press, so you hired one that walked. There was a middle-aged man who pushed a small portable press through the streets of Harlem, and for a few cents he would set your card and print it on the spot while you waited. No print shop would extend credit to a family that could not make its rent, so the trade simply came to the sidewalk instead, the way the people on the ground had always found a way to make things work. He helped his neighbors keep a roof over their heads, one printed card at a time, first turn. Everything so far was clever and harmless. A coin, a card, a printer who came to your door. The next stretch is where clever crosses a line, because to fill that jar you had to sell things the law said you could not sell. Number 16 is where the kitchen itself became a crime. Number 17, the timing. She did not throw it on a whim. She read the calendar like a farmer reads the sky. Saturday, because Saturday was payday for the laboring men, their pockets at their fullest. Or Thursday, because Thursday was the day domestic workers, the women who cleaned other people's homes, had their afternoon off. Wages were thin and irregular, and she could not afford to guess wrong, so she opened her door at the exact hour the money was in hand. The pattern is so steady across the records that historians today can use the party nights to map who in Harlem worked which trade. She knew when her neighbors were paid, and she planned around it, the way any careful household has always done. Number 16, the unlicensed kitchen. The smell reached you on the stairs before you ever got to the door. Fried chicken, fried fish, chitterling simmering, hoppin' john, collard greens, sweet potato pone, every plate with a price beside it. She had turned her kitchen into a restaurant for the night. A quarter at the door, plus the food, plus the drink, could clear $50 to $100 in a single evening, which was the rent and a little breathing room besides. There was no permit, no inspection, no license. And selling cooked food this way was exactly the sort of thing the city could fine you for. It is the same warm, crowded thing as a church supper or a fish fry where the plates are sold to help a family in need. Only here, the family being helped was her own. Number 15, King Kong and Shorties. This is the one that brought the wagon. The liquor was homemade, corn whiskey so rough they called it King Kong, or gin run up in a bathtub, sold by the pint or in quarter-pint pours the regulars called Shorties. This was Prohibition. Selling it was a federal crime, and a party with a bar in the back was breaking the law in the plainest way there was. Raids happened, and a host who was caught could lose the night's take, the rent money, and pay fines in the hundreds of dollars. And then in 1933, the government repealed Prohibition and made the liquor legal, which sounds like mercy until you remember that it took away the single most profitable thing these families had to sell. They poured it anyway while it lasted. The drink in your hand was the riskiest thing in the room. Number 14, the hired stride man. She did not simply put on a record, she hired a piano player. And in Harlem in those years that might mean one of the giants, because Fats Waller, James P. Johnson, and Willie the Lion Smith all made the rounds of the rent parties. They arrived late, sat down at somebody's battered upright, and the real evening began, the cutting contest, each player trying to outlast the next until the sun came up. The hat went around for the musician while the jar by the door filled for the rent. The famous clubs downtown booked these same men and sold a whites-only audience the right to watch them play. The rent party is where they played for their own people. Long after those years had passed, that simple idea, a musician playing from home so the neighborhood could keep him fed, has been carried on by Harlem players to this day, nearly a century old, and it still works. Number 13, renting the floor. Before the party ever started, the flat was already breaking the rules just by holding everyone who lived inside it. The only way to make the rent was to take more bodies in, and in the worst blocks, the housing experts of the day counted 5,000 to 7,000 people living on a single city block. Tenants took in lodgers, and lodgers took in shift sleepers, so that a bed which held a family by night held a night worker by day. The WPA writer Frank Bird wrote all of this down in 1938, sitting with Harlemites for the Federal Writers Project, and his account rests in the Library of Congress today, the record finally catching up to what every tenant already knew in their bones. The crowding was never a choice anyone made freely. A whole population had been pressed into a few square blocks, and the landlords charged extra for the privilege. Air and rest were a rent these families paid twice. Second turn. From here, the tactics stop being one clever woman in one flat and start being a whole block moving as one. Ahead lies the quiet machinery underneath it all, the numbers game, the backroom games, the small payments that kept the lights on. Number 12 is a bet placed against the street itself. Number 12, playing the numbers. Some nights the rent did not come from the door at all. It came from a bet. The numbers, the policy game, was the neighborhood's own lottery. Pennies laid on a 3-digit number, a winning hit paying 600 to 1. The historians behind the study Playing the Numbers, Shane White and his colleagues, traced how central it was to Harlem life, and how a man like Casper Holstein built a fortune as a numbers banker, remembered by some as a gangster and by others as the man who quietly paid the rent for families who had nowhere else to turn. It was against the law, and the police and the rackets both took their cut. The state watched it work for decades, then took it over and called it the lottery. The very same penny arithmetic, now carrying a government seal. Number 11, the backroom game. Past the dancing, behind a closed door, a game was often running, cards or dice, and the host took a small cut of every pot, one more stream feeding into the same jar by the door. Gambling proceeds, the records gently note, were sometimes part of how the rent got made, folded in with the door money and the food and the drink. It was against the law, and it was quiet, the kind of thing you only found if you knew to ask. And one more reason to keep that policeman moving past the door. There has always been a game running somewhere in every city, but here the pot was not winnings to spend. It was somebody's rent coming due on Monday morning. Number 10, the landlady's circuit. The person running all of this was, very often, a woman, and that is not a small detail. It is the engine of the whole story. Black women carried the household's survival on their backs, and they were the ones who knew how to feed 50 and collect from 100. They had to be. In these years, black women looking for domestic work would gather on Bronx street corners that came to be known bitterly as the slave markets, where they were hired by the hour for as little as 25 cents. The journalist Marvel Cook and the organizer Ella Baker brought it into the light in The Crisis in November of 1935. A full hour on her knees scrubbing another woman's floor paid the very same 25 cents as a single guest stepping through her own door, so she opened her own door. The party was the one place where her labor finally paid what it was truly worth. Number 9, dancing until the Black Maria came. The party did not end at any polite hour. It ran until dawn, or until somebody summoned the Black Maria, which was the old name for the police patrol wagon. Every extra hour meant more quarters in the jar, more plates sold, more shorties poured on. So the music stayed loud and the dancing stayed close in a railroad flat built for one family and now holding 100. The wagon was always one telephone call away from a tired neighbor upstairs or from a policeman who had not been paid to look the other way. We have all known a gathering that runs until someone complains of the noise, but this clock was never counting fun. It was counting rent. Number 8, the neighbor rotation. No one threw a party every single month because you cannot ask the same 100 neighbors to pay at your door week after week. So it rotated. This week your flat, next week mine, the month after that, the family on the 3rd floor. Duke Ellington remembered the house rent party as an outgrowth of the older parlor socials and the church suppers, the long tradition of gathering to raise a little money for somebody in need. It was mutual aid with a piano in the corner. Everyone paid in when it was their neighbor's turn, knowing full well their own turn was coming around. You have seen the same shape your whole life, in the passing of a collection plate, the supper held for a family that has fallen on hard times, the quiet, fund-raised hand to hand. The bones of it are old as kindness itself. Harlem simply set them to music. 3rd turn. What is left are the tactics that crossed out of the parlor and into the street, where Harlem stopped hiding from eviction and began to face it in the open. It stops being clever here. It starts being dangerous. Number 7, the payment to the beat cop. Here is the uncomfortable truth that kept so many lights on. Enforcement could be bought. Policing in Harlem during these years ran thick with graft, and a quiet payment to the right officer could buy a night without a raid. The host who could afford it kept dancing. The host who could not got the wagon at her door. It tells you everything about that world, that staying housed could mean paying off the very men sworn to enforce the rules you were breaking only to survive. Reformers spent years documenting the corruption, and the payoffs were an open secret. These families did not buy the law. They rented a little piece from it one night at a time. Number 6, the whisper network. Even with the cards printed, handing them out was an art of discretion. Hosts passed tickets to friends and to the right strangers, sometimes tucking them where only the knowing would find them, always wary of catching a policeman's eye. The card never once said rent party. It said social whist party, and the whole neighborhood understood the code without it ever being spoken aloud. An entire economy moving along on a gentle euphemism. One loud word in the wrong ear, and the night was finished. The quiet itself was the strategy. Number 5, the rent strike. When dodging the landlord was no longer enough, tenants stopped paying him at all. Together, on purpose, and the roots of it were in Harlem itself. Back in 1928, a man named Richard B. Moore and his neighbors founded the Harlem Tenants League, making the case that the punishing rents were not bad luck, but a built-in part of how the color line worked. One tenant who withholds his rent is simply evicted. A whole building withholding its rent at once becomes a problem the landlord cannot solve one marshal at a time. Through the early 1930s, organized rent strikes spread outward from Harlem across the Bronx and Brooklyn. The landlords answered with eviction notices by the stack. The tenants answered by refusing to move. And the tenant unions that still organize in this country grew from that very root. The idea never died. It only grew older and more settled. Number 4, putting the furniture back. This one is pure defiance, and there is a glory in it. When the marshal won, when a family's furniture was carried down and dumped out on the curb, organizers from the neighborhood unemployed councils would wait for the officials to leave, and then carry every last stick of it back up the stairs and into the apartment. The eviction was undone by sundown. In Harlem, the record tells us, these struggles against the marshal and the furniture hauled faithfully back home helped push the relief offices to begin paying families' rent outright. The Daily Worker reported on the furniture battles through 1932. a whole block refusing to accept that the law had the final word on who got to sleep where. The city could put you out on paper. The street put you right back inside. You moved my neighbor out today. We will move her back in by nightfall. Last turn before the end. When the rent party economy was not enough, Harlem helped light a fuse that ran the length of the whole city. And the next two are where it broke fully into the open. They are the hardest moments on this list, and the ones the gentler version of this history tends to leave out altogether. Number 3, the human wall. When dodging the marshal stopped working, the tenants reached for the one thing a landlord could not outspend: people in numbers too large to move aside. When the marshals and the police came to carry out an eviction, crowds gathered, and they made each removal so slow and so costly that the city's own marshals, who were paid by the job, found the work was no longer worth their while. Sent back to the same address again and again, many of them simply gave up, and families won the right to stay. The fiercest of these stands took place just north of Harlem, in the Bronx. At one eviction on Olinville Avenue, in January of 1932, the crowd that gathered to stop the removal of 17 tenants grew to roughly 4,000 people. 4,000 neighbors standing against one marshal's stack of paperwork, and the neighbors won. Number 2, hot water and hat pins. And when standing in the street was not enough, the women carried the fight up to the windows above it. In the Bronx, where the resistance burned hottest of all, most of the people up on the rooftops and the fire escapes, the records tell us, were women. They poured scalding water down onto the police in the street below. They rolled marbles under the hooves of the mounted officers' horses to bring them down, and they jabbed at those horses with the long needles the hat makers used. Ordinary hat pins turned into weapons of last resort. These were not trained radicals. They were mothers and domestic workers and laundresses who had simply decided that the line they would defend was their own front door. It is the fiercest image in this whole history, and the one most completely left out of the story we are usually told about these years. Number 1, the right to stay. Number 1 is not a trick at all. It is the thing that every trick on this list was secretly about. The right to stay. Add it all up. The quarter dropped in the jar. The card that said Whist and meant survival. The bathtub gin. The numbers. The piano playing on till dawn. The furniture carried faithfully back upstairs. The crowds that made the marshals turn around and go home. This whole improvised, half-hidden economy was one community insisting, against every ordinary door shut in its face, that it would not be moved. And here is the part most people never hear. It worked, and not only for a single night. The weight of all those refusals, the strikes, the crowds at the evictions, and the hardship laid bare by the Harlem unrest of 1935 pushed the city toward something new. Legal stays of eviction that for the first time let a tenant ask a court for a little time. And in October of 1937 came the Harlem River Houses, the first public housing built with federal money for Black Americans, where the rent was $21 a month and no landlord could triple it on a whim. She owed nothing to the marshal. She owed nothing to the man who printed the eviction notice. She owed nothing to anyone but the neighbor climbing her stairs with a quarter held warm in his hand. The social whist party was never really about whist, and it was barely about the party. It was a coded word for a people who had been told they did not get to stay, answering back quietly at first, and then plainly that they would. So here is what I would ask you to do with all of this. Pick just one. The next time you hear someone say those families were helpless, or that they simply sat and waited for the New Deal to come and save them, tell them about the quarter in the jar, Tell them about the card that fooled the cops. Tell them about the women at the windows. And tell me, down in the comments, if anyone in your own family ever threw a party to make the rent or kept a recipe, a card, a story from those years. Somebody in your family tree knew a version of this. I would wager on it. And if you would like to walk through more of this quiet history, the kind that was let go so still, I hope you will subscribe and come along. Because next time we follow the bottle out of the city and up into the hills. 20 banned secrets of Depression-era moonshine. The backwoods liquor trade that every Dry County family understood. The one that kept whole communities fed when the law said no. That rough King Kong gin back at number 15 was only the city cousin of what is coming. I will see you there, because this knowledge did not die. It only went quiet. It is time to start listening again.